Welcome to this fifth webinar in our second series of Encore webinars. These webinars are sponsored by the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging and Conrad Grebel University College here in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and the Centre for Aging and Pastoral Studies in Canberra, Australia. My name is Jane Kipfer, and I'm here in Waterloo, and my co-host is Sally Mordyke in Australia. These webinars have their origins in the 10th International Conference on Aging and Spirituality that was held in June of 2023 here in Waterloo. And they're providing us as people who are interested in spirituality and aging with opportunity to keep learning and to stay connected around the world in this time in between in-person conferences. We're so glad that you could join us. Yes, we are recording, and you will be sent a link to access the video and PowerPoint slides in the days ahead. So today we have Glenn McCullough joining us from Toronto, which is just down the highway from me. He's here to help us to learn about dream work and spiritual growth in later life, becoming elders. So Glenn McCullough is Assistant Professor of Practical Theology and Spiritual Care at Emmanuel College and Knox College in the University of Toronto. He's an ordained minister and a practicing therapist. His research interests include the spiritual, philosophical, and historical roots of various psychotherapeutic modalities, sleep, dreams, and dream interpretation in various cultural and religious contexts, biblical, theological, and interfaith traditions of Sophia, Christian and comparative mysticism, and theory and method in theology and religious studies. And Glenn has a new book just released entitled Jacob Boehme and the Spiritual Roots of Psychotherapy, Dream, Ecstasy, and Wisdom. And I think he has a link to that book that he can put in the chat for you if you're interested in looking that up. Likely it's one of these academic books that has quite a price tag on it. So the best way to access a book like that is often through university libraries where you might be able to access it as a download. So welcome, Glenn. You were all ready to talk with us about dreams in a roundtable discussion at the international conference, and then you took sick. And so we've been waiting almost 2 years to finally get to learn from you. Now, I'm so looking forward to your presentation. And I'll soon turn the floor over to you, Glenn. But first, just to remind everyone to please keep your microphones muted while you're listening. And Sally will keep an eye on the chat for us, and then we'll have some time for questions, perhaps partway through, and then again at the end. So Glenn, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jane. I am just thrilled to be presenting today. As Jane said, I had hoped to present at an earlier conference, but the stars didn't align, and they have aligned today, so that's wonderful. Interestingly, I had a dream about this presentation last night, as you might expect, and I had a script all planned out that I was going to read from in a very sterile manner. And the dream told me that I should be a little more spontaneous and try to find my voice. So I'm going to try and do that. I have a few slides for you that I'll share here. And I will just begin walking you through these. Feel free, as Jane said, to participate in the chat. I'm happy to see your questions and comments as we go through. So the topic really is about becoming elders. And that word elder is quite interesting because it tends to cross into multiple cultural traditions and religious traditions. Let's just get things rolling here with a question for all of you, and you can participate in the chat. As you think about elders who have helped you on your journey, what qualities stand out? Qualities of personality or of character or of anything really. What stands out to you when steadiness, patience, wisdom?
Listening. Non-judgmental.
Yes, very good. We're seeing some common themes here. Guide, willingness to speak out, willingness to listen, looks you in the eyes. I like that.
Offering occasional, very wise comments or questions that you think about later a great deal.
Yes, wise, wisdom. Now that's going to be a central theme for us, actually. Thank you for these contributions. That's very helpful. Taking their time, sharing experiences, unafraid to criticize lovingly. Allowing you to reflect inward, to find answers within. I love that. That's going to be a central theme in what I'm saying today. Quiet, a real life. Yeah. Reminiscing, inner peace. Otherworldly. Okay, yes. Let's get to the otherworldly part. As you probably know from the little blurb on this talk, it has much to do with Carl Jung, and my approach to dreams is heavily influenced by both Freud and Jung, but also by other cultural and religious traditions. In my experience, Jung is one of the most, in terms of dreams, his approach to dreams is one of the most open that I've experienced, and therefore is a way of gathering many different traditions. And in fact, in all of Jung's writings, he tends to do that. I want to start with this quote from Jung. In indigenous communities, and Jung himself was, one can argue, and Vine Deloria Jr., the famous indigenous writer, has argued that Jung's overall project was a way to center indigenous traditions and to remind Westerners of the indigenous heritage that they had neglected. So Jung says, in indigenous communities, we observe that the old people are almost always the guardians of the mysteries and the laws, and it is in these that the cultural heritage of the tribe is expressed. How does the matter stand with us? In other words, with us Westerners? Where is the wisdom of our old people? Where are their precious secrets and their visions? For the most part, our old people try to compete with the young. Interesting, and written many years ago. Things have changed a bit since then. And I think we're beginning, at least among this group, to acknowledge the wisdom of age that comes with age. But Jung is highlighting here, I think, what it means to be an elder in indigenous traditions. And of course, that's a word that's used in indigenous traditions. It's also used, for example, in Protestant traditions. My background as a minister is in the Protestant church, where we have elders in our communities who are elected to be spiritual guides within that community. But part of what it seems to mean to be an elder is to be a kind of spiritual guide. We find this in many traditions. In some ways, elders are identified by a kind of spiritual presence. You might say a spiritual power that is different from worldly power, and a spiritual discernment that allows them to guide others. So let's talk about wisdom for a minute. In the Western tradition, Judaism and Christianity especially, wisdom is distinguished from knowledge. In the Latin, we have sapientia for wisdom and scientia for knowledge. Scientia, from which we get the term science, and really the tradition out of which modern science developed. These are very different things. Knowledge is about information. It's about facts and figures. It's about collecting data. And really in the West, we have an explosion because of the internet We have an explosion in access to knowledge. But the question is, where is the wisdom? And the products of modern science and technology, the technological products of science, you might say, whenever there is a new innovation in technology, such as AI, it always comes out with this, vaunted, it's going to save the world, it's going to improve humanity, it's going to help us. The internet was the same, email was the same. There's always a kind of crackle in the air when we get a new technology. But very often they don't measure up to the promises. And the question of wisdom, I think, is about how we use these technologies. Wisdom is often about the correct use of knowledge. So the idea that AI, as it scours the internet and scavenges all this knowledge and data all over the internet, the idea that that is going to greatly improve humanity, I'm very suspicious of that, unless there is some wisdom to guide it. Now, in the West, wisdom is usually associated with practical experience. In the ancient Greek tradition, we have the idea of phronesis, which is a practical wisdom. So hypothetically, wisdom should accompany life experience. And this is the idea where, as we grow older, we gain wisdom from our life experience. I was just looking at this book, The Life Cycle Completed, by Erik Erikson and his wife, Jung. Probably the most famous developmental psychologist in the West. And his ninth stage of development is about aging, and he defines that stage according to the quality of wisdom, which Joan and Erik Erikson define wisdom in terms of tact. I thought that was interesting, being tactful, knowing the right thing to say at the right time. Again, a practical quality. If we look to Western religious traditions, and indeed other spiritual traditions, wisdom is often something we receive. It's a gift. It's not something that the ego itself develops, but it's more about the ego surrendering and releasing and receiving from beyond the ego. And indeed, in the Western tradition, in Christianity especially, wisdom is personified in the Bible as an eternal being, Sophia, a divine being. If you know some of the stories in the Hebrew Bible, you might know of King Solomon, who is said to have received wisdom from God. And this was after God appeared to him in a dream. And Solomon, rather than requesting the sort of ego-bound things, like God offered Solomon whatever he wanted, and rather than requesting riches or security or prestige to aggrandize the ego, he requests wisdom, which is something that will not just serve himself, but will serve the greater good of the community. So there is this idea of releasing and receiving wisdom from beyond you. Later on in the Christian tradition, there's a famous theologian named Jakob Boehme in the German, or Jacob Boehme in English, who probably talked about divine wisdom more than any other theologian. And for Boehme, wisdom is associated with the human imagination and with dreaming. So this is what my new book is about. It's about the wisdom of dreams. And Boehme is building on a Western tradition, a Christian tradition that goes back to Augustine. He's also drawing on Jewish traditions and Jewish mystical traditions, the Kabbalah, where we find that dreams are highlighted as a way that God speaks to us, because this is, of course, a theme in the Bible. So that's really what we're looking at in this talk. Dreams as a source of wisdom, a source that as we examine our dreams in conversation with our life experience, especially in the second half of life, this is one way that we might become wise, or at least learn what wisdom means. So just to center us here, I thought I would put up an icon of Divine Sophia, who is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as the first of God's creations, an eternal being. And for Bohm, Jacob Bohm, Sophia is the imagination of God through which God created the entire cosmos. And all of us have access to Sophia and access to that divine imagination every night in our dreams, as well as when we're awake in our imaginative fantasies and our creative ideas. So that's the link between imagination, dreams, and wisdom. Now, let me say just something about this idea of the great reversal that happens in aging. This is the idea that's now been popularized. For example, Richard Rohr has a book called Falling Upward about the spirituality of the two halves of life. But this idea really comes from Carl Jung, who taught that the skills that have served us in the first half of life can become an impediment in the second half. Things that were solutions for us in the first half of life can become problems in the second half. And basically, for Jung, the first half is really about developing the ego and allowing the ego to sort of expand its understanding, its perception of the world. But there's something very different that happens in the second half of life, where the ego has to sort of step back and reorient itself. Jung put it this way. He said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." This is taken from The Stages of Life, one of his, it's a very short essay, but has become very influential in recent books like the Richard Rohr book I just mentioned. Another quote from this essay: "I said just now," Jung had mentioned in the previous paragraph, "that we have no schools for 40-year-olds. That is not quite true. Our religions were always such schools in the past. But how many people regard them like that today? How many of us older ones have been brought up in such a school and really prepared for the second half of life, for old age, death, in eternity?" So again, Jung is looking here at the religions of his day. He's thinking mainly of Protestantism, I think. But the question is, are our religions preparing us for the second half of life and what lies beyond? Jung found them wanting. And what he advised people to do in the second half of life was to attend to their dreams, attend to this inner wisdom of the soul, which he thought was the best school, the best preparation for the second half of life. Let me give you an example from the dream of a 40-year-old woman named Marie, who felt herself to be at a point of midlife transition. Marie dreamed that she had given birth to twins. Though only one of the infants was well-loved and healthy, the other had been forgotten. Not only was the forgotten child hungry and angry, but its head had also somehow become completely encased in a seamless golden metal mask. And what a symbol that is. This is just a small snippet of a dream, but can you see here this idea of two halves of life, or two parts of the self? Are you seeing that in this dream? The twins? Why don't we just pause here and take any comments about this dream? How might you interpret this dream if someone brought this to you? Any ideas? Feel free to put comments in the chat or just unmute yourself and speak.
Can you reread those sentences about the twins?
Sure. And can you see them on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. Marie dreamed that she had given birth to twins. Though one of the infants was well loved and healthy, the other had been forgotten. Not only was the forgotten child hungry and angry, but its head had also somehow become completely encased in a seamless golden metal mask.
It seems to me that the healthy infant was the young one, and the older one that was neglected was our older selves. And
Right.
the mask is preventing the learning that should have taken place.
Okay, interesting. Now that's interesting because you've associated one of the twins with a younger and an older self. The dream is interesting because they're twins, so that means they're the same age, right? Now, so that's the question here. Often in the midpoint of life, it's almost as if we have two selves or two parts of ourselves. And this is often, you see this with people as they're starting to look toward their retirement. Maybe they've been in a career for a long time and they're starting to count down the days before they retire. And it's as if half of them is already in the retirement and half of them is still in the job. But usually in a dream, when you have a baby, it's talking about the birth of something new. Okay, so you might say that the first half of life gives birth to something new in the form of, some kind of ego mastery or ego competence, certain skills of the ego, all those things we learn to do in the first half of life. We learn to drive, we have relationships, we have, some of us, move out and might buy a house of our own or property, we take care of things, all those responsibilities, we might have a family. All of that is sort of first half of life. And something beautiful is born in that. But then we have this other child that when we hit life's midpoint, that this other baby is there kind of tugging at our clothing, at our pant leg, saying, pay attention to me. I'm hungry. You need to feed me. This child is hungry and angry. That's interesting, the anger here, because you sometimes see that in people who are feeling this tug of the second half of life. They may be in a job or a career that is no longer fulfilling for them, and there's a certain resentment or anger that creeps in because they know there's something calling them. Lots of good stuff in the chat here. Yes. Oh, yes. 74. Thank you, Georgina. Studying at the Australian University of Theology. Yes, that is wonderful. Maybe there's something being born there. She needs to connect with the masked one, the hidden part of herself. Okay, so that's a good reading of that mask. There's something hiding there in that mask. But notice it's also a golden mask. Okay, so there's something about it. Now, Jung talked a lot about the persona as the mask we wear in public to put on a good face for others. The persona was the mask we wear that tends to hide our shadowy parts. It hides the parts of ourselves we're not quite as, that are not fit for public consumption, that we, the little secrets we wouldn't talk about in public. But yes, Jessica is saying that part of us in the mask has been neglected, also idolized and frozen. I love that. That's exactly right, I think. Yeah. There's a certain idolizing in this golden metal mask. I put it on for others. But notice in the second half of life, there has to be a kind of unmasking. It's one of the tasks, I think, in the second half of life is to really get comfortable with your true self. And you notice in elderly people who have done this work, they will be so blunt with you, so honest, so authentic in presenting their true self. The mask has come off. And in a way, you don't need the mask as much because you're not trying to oppress your boss or your colleagues or whatever. You can be your true self. That's what this dream, I think, is calling her. Now, this is just a snippet, right? This is just a few sentences of a dream. So imagine the wisdom that could come from reading longer portions. Let's keep going here. What I'm going to do here is just go through very quickly a whole list of themes that I see in clients who are in later life and also in my research. This is not an exhaustive list, but there's a lot here. It might be exhausting for me to go through it. You will notice, hopefully, some themes that resonate with you. Not all of them may, but many of these, I think, are deeply spiritual themes. And many of these come from the work of Jung, but we're also moving outside the bounds of Jung. So first and foremost, in the second half of life, we tend to get an inner calling as opposed to an outer one. The outer world, with all its responsibilities and demands, tends to, in some ways, become old. We become slightly tired of some of those responsibilities, and there's a kind of withdrawing into the inner space. Now, basically, all of us, all the time, are oscillating between outer and inner. It's not an either or. We have our times of extroversion and introversion, but a lot of the calling in the second half of life, the calling toward wisdom, is, I think, coming from within, from our deeper self. Increased awareness of the inner world, including the cast of characters in that world, which tend to appear in dreams as unknown inner parts of the self. Okay, there's a lot there. Basically, I would say that most of the characters that populate your dreams are parts of you. And this goes back to Jung's understanding of the unconscious that he inherited from many therapists before him, from the French hypnotists who were working hundreds of years before him. Freud diverged from this accepted view of the unconscious as a collection of part selves. Freud, as you might know, defined the unconscious in terms of id and its drives. But for Jung, it was this cast of characters, this kind of inner family. And interestingly, if you've heard of internal family systems theory by Richard Schwartz, it's kind of all the rage today, Schwartz independently rediscovered Jung's model of the unconscious as this collection of characters. So self-awareness is about getting to know these part selves, these characters within that often we're not aware of. Some of these characters include shadow figures. Often these appear in dreams as same gender figures who may have a kind of nefarious or shadowy cast to them. Jung talked about this as the statistical criminal in all of us. But there can be positive shadow figures as well. A positive shadow figure might show up in your dream with a talent that you've never expressed before, urging you to express that gift. The shadow is often about identity, coming to know who you are. Other characters that Jung talks about are the anima and animus, who often appear in dreams as romantic interests. We're attracted to them romantically. And these characters are really about relationality. So Jung believed that in any romantic relationship in real life, we're often projecting our anima or animus onto that romantic partner. So we project onto our partner the perfect man or woman. And after we get married, we realize, oh, wait, they might have a few flaws. And after 7 years, those flaws are kind of showing up, in pretty bold relief. So the projections of the perfect or the ideal partner, those projections fall away, and then we're forced to deal with real life relationships. But what happens in that process of falling in love and then getting to a more reality-based relationship is that we identify what those projections were, and we begin to see the inner anima or animus, the ideal person who we are hoping to find in a partner. And that says a lot about us and about our relational tendencies. We often find the inferior function in dreams. Jung was famous for his typology, thinking versus feeling, intuition versus sensing. Many of us have one of these qualities as dominant, and that means the opposing quality will be inferior. So if I'm a thinker and I tend to approach things as a thinker, that means my feeling function is, somewhere undeveloped in me. When I first started doing therapy, you could say my feeling function was in kindergarten still. My feelings when they came up in therapy had that childlike quality, an immature quality, and therefore they were embarrassing to me. As a thinker who likes to be logical and rational all the time, my feelings felt like a little kindergarten character who was being irrational, because feelings are always irrational. Likewise with intuition and sensing. Sensing is more of a kind of scientific data collection approach to reality, whereas intuition goes with the gut feelings, and those two functions don't make sense to each other, which is why one becomes dominant, the other becomes repressed. So dreams foreground that inferior function. Awareness of the inner elder. So this is interesting. Jung believed that the way we ultimately become elders is by accessing an inner dream character who is identified with wisdom, spiritual discernment, and a kind of spiritual power, you might say. Jung talked about these as the wise old man, generally in men, and the wise woman or great mother or earth mother, generally in women. The inner elder is a representative of what Jung called the self. The self is not the ego, crucially. The self is outside the ego. The self is this inner centering principle, a God image. And usually, if you have a spiritual tradition, the self is identified with these great spiritual teachers. Jesus, the Buddha, Muhammad are all images of the self for Jung. So if you're Buddhist, not only do you see Buddha as an outer figure, but you see your own Buddha nature within as an inner figure. Awareness of the animal kingdom and the cosmos, including maps of the cosmos or cosmology. Crucially, this includes the vertical dimension. So as we look at sacred stories all around the world, it's hard not to notice this three-tiered reality. Heavens above, an underworld below, and here we are in Middle Earth, to use Tolkien's phrase, Middle Earth, right in this middle layer. Well, in your dreams, that three-tiered reality is still there, and many people will take trips to the underworld, often where they will find deceased ancestors. Sometimes people take trips to the upper world, which is defined slightly differently in different traditions. But becoming aware of this cosmos is part of what grants you some of this spiritual awareness and wisdom. Making peace with your personal past. A lot of memories show up in dreams, and a lot of characters and situations that we don't feel good about. We may feel guilty, we may feel wounded, we may wish we could take something back. And dreams are often about accepting and forgiving ourselves for those past actions. Related to this is a life review. Often dreams, especially in the second half of life, will revisit our life as if we're trying to sum up what's happened, and to figure out what we've accomplished. What have we done here? How have our actions affected others? How have we caused pain? And what have we learned from it? This is a very common theme in the near-death experience literature for anyone who's familiar with this. Often there's a life review in the near-death experience where, you know, we have this phrase that my life flashed before my eyes. Well, that's literally what happens in an NDE. And very often it's reported that the near-death experiencer sees all of these events in their life, sees events that have caused them pain and caused others pain, but there's not a feeling of guilt for these. There's an idea that you need to learn from these experiences. In some near-death experiences and life reviews, you feel how your actions felt to the other person, how what you did affected the other person emotionally, may have wounded them. And by feeling the other person's feelings, you're able to learn from your actions. So there's some kind of connection here between near-death experiences and the dream world that I haven't quite worked out yet, but it's there. Processing and release of personal, collective, and intergenerational trauma, which is related to the life review. The word for dream in German is Traum, which is very close to the word for trauma. It was Freud, I think, who should be credited with discovering that dreams have a lot to do with trauma. And very often they surface that trauma in a very sensitive way. In other words, the dream will give you the trauma sometimes in just little bits, little bites, so that you can process it slowly. Now, that's not always the case. There are traumatic dreams that will be repetitive and, you know, very difficult to experience. But in general, the trauma processing seems to be one of the dream's functions, primary functions, you might say. Living your unlived life. Very often you have a dream about things you wish you had done or things that you still could do. I think Socrates, just before he drank the hemlock, was having dreams about learning to play the flute or something, some musical instrument that he hadn't done. You know, the philosopher who didn't pursue enough music. Reacquaintance with deceased friends, family, and ancestors who have passed on. This again is a universal theme. We see people in dreams who have passed over and are still alive in some kind of spirit world. In fact, in many traditions, the dream world is the spirit world. It's important, I think, even in the West, to take these dreams seriously. In other words, if you meet a dead relative in a dream and they seem to be alive in the dream, you need to take that seriously. There's something they're saying to you. There's a way they're reconnecting with you. And they may be telling you something from the world beyond. Jung, even though he was, you know, careful to define himself as an empirical scientist, he saw this theme so often in dreams that he had to grant its psychological importance. In other words, even though he couldn't explain it scientifically, He truly believed that somehow death was not the end, and that those who had passed over will communicate to us in dreams. This is a big one: ancestral burdens, missions, and ancestral support to carry them through. In many dreams, it's as if the ancestors are on the other side cheering us on with the mission that needs to be accomplished. For example, coming to terms with the flaws of ancestors, unearthing family secrets, releasing long-held family burdens. As Vine Deloria said about Jung, dreams are about answering questions posed by the ancestors. And Jung himself experienced that, as we'll see. The mission and purpose of our own life, as depicted in dreams, is often depicted in the context of a lineage. There are memories that appear in dreams that don't seem to be our own memories, at least not in this life. And this has led many people to think about ancestral memory or past life memories. Now, I don't know if you believe in reincarnation in your spiritual tradition. I tend to think that there's actually robust evidence for reincarnation from a scientific perspective based on the work of Ian Stevenson. Stevenson was a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who studied over 4,000 accounts of children who remembered past lives. And in some cases, they could be verified. There was no way to explain how the children would know about this past life. I think those memories show up in dreams. I can remember a very vivid dream of being in a medieval Irish monastery. And when I woke up from that, I literally felt I'd been in the Middle Ages. My grandparents were all from Ireland. I have no idea if I was at some point in an Irish monastery, but the dream seemed to be trying to convey to me that I was part of this lineage somehow. Whatever you think about the truth of those memories, the dreams take them seriously, and they want you to take them seriously. Preparing for death as a transition to the next stage. Death is not the end. And again, related to it, glimpses of the world to come, which are not infrequent. It's very interesting how the afterlife is depicted in dreams. It's much like, again, much like the near-death experience literature. It's always symbolic, it's always metaphorical. And it, I think, shows the degree to which our sacred texts, when they try to talk about an afterlife, that they are also dealing with poetic, metaphorical, symbolic realities. You can't put these things into words, and yet dreams will give you vivid experiences that are themselves symbolic. One more dream example here. This is the dream of a 6-year-old woman 2 years before dying. In the dream, she had entered the hereafter. There was a class going on, and various deceased women friends of hers sat on the front bench. An atmosphere of general expectation prevailed. She looked around for a teacher or lecturer, but could find none. Then it became plain that she herself was the lecturer, for immediately after death, people had to give accounts of the total experience of their lives. Very interesting. She herself was the lecturer. This might go back to Jung's quote about, where are our teachers on the afterlife? Well, it may be that you need this inner guide offered by dreams to help be your own inner teacher, to make you your own teacher in a sense. Okay, moving on and being aware of time, I want to give just a few simple guidelines for interpreting dreams. Some of you are experienced at this, I bet, and have worked with therapists in the past. Others are quite new to it. So here's a very quick and very maybe simplistic way to approach dreams. Usually all characters and events in the dream are hidden aspects of the dreamer. So this is subjective interpretation. And that works, in my experience, for like 95% of dreams. Occasionally, a figure in a dream will represent the actual person in waking life. especially if you're dreaming about someone who is very close to you, family member, spouse, loved one. But when it comes to friends and friend groups, often when you're dreaming of friends, you're actually dreaming about the friend as a part of yourself. So really stick to that subjective interpretation as much as possible. This one seems simple, but it takes a long time for people to catch on to this. Dreams tell you something you don't already know. The first time you read one of your dreams and interpret it, I find the dreamer almost always interprets it in a way that suits what they're already doing. In therapy, we would call this an ego-syntonic interpretation. We interpret the dream to tell us, as if to give us a pat on the head and say, you're doing everything right. You don't need to change a thing. Okay, but then when you look deeper at the dream, you begin to see, oh, wait a second, it's telling me something radically different. It's showing me a new path. It's showing me something I don't know about myself. It's showing me something that's ego dystonic, that's asking the ego to change. And that's why it's so hard to see. So that's why it can be difficult to interpret your own dreams. You have to be very careful with that. 4, unpack each person and event symbolically, describing all your personal associations and feelings. So for each symbol, it's as if there are rays of meaning coming out from that symbol, and you need to unpack all the layers of association. Pay crucial attention to feeling tones. How did you feel at each point in the dream? 6, attend to all aspects of the narrative. A dream is a story. It has an opening scene. It has a cast of characters, rising action, climax. Pay special attention to the ending, the denouement, or what Jung called the lysis, which is sort of the resolution. It's the lysis is a medical term, meaning the outcome of the illness. So in many cases, the dreams will foreshadow an outcome. The dreamer is the expert on their own dreams, but you generally can't interpret your own dreams. And if that sounds paradoxical, it is. You need to tell your dreams to other people. A trained therapist can be very helpful. If the therapist gets the interpretation right, frequently the light bulb goes off in the dreamer. There's an aha or insight moment, and they say, of course, that makes total sense. Okay, just in closing, in the last few minutes here, I wanted to show you a bit about Jung's Red Book. We have about 10 minutes left. I'll just go through this very quickly. This was published not too long ago. It's Jung's account of his own dreams and visions. And it was, it was quite mysterious for many years. It was held by Jung's family, and they hadn't published it, and it finally came out. And what we got, it's a giant book, by the way. I have it behind me here. I'll show it to you. Gigantic book with many full color pages. It has Jung's calligraphy and his painting. He's quite a good artist. If you zoom in here, you see the detail in these illuminations. Many of his painted figures from his dreams. You see a mandala figure on the left. On the right, we see a person prostrating themselves and a kind of spirit fire coming out of the ground there. Beautiful paintings. Here we see a character who is kind of an archaic figure, an archaic man, sort of a hunter-gatherer from the historical past that Jung learned a great deal from. One of the first things Jung did at the beginning of the Red Book, in the beginning of his exploration of his own inner world, he met the figure of Elijah and Salome. Elijah, the biblical prophet, and Salome is a character in the New Testament who famously demanded the head of John the Baptist on a platter. So, you know, a rather interesting figure. So Jung here is doing a kind of active imagination, asking questions to his unconscious and waiting for an answer. Who are you, says Jung. And the figure in his vision answered, I am Elijah, and this is my daughter Salome, the daughter of Herod, the bloodthirsty woman. Why do you judge so? You see that she is blind. She is my daughter, the daughter of the prophet. What miracle has united you? Asks Jung. It is no miracle. It was so from the beginning. My wisdom and my daughter are one. Interesting. So wisdom as a female character, which, as I've said, is in keeping with the biblical tradition in some ways. I am shocked. I am incapable of grasping it. Many of Jung's visions were shocking. They told him something new that he didn't already know, and it took him years and years to unpack them and finally come to terms with them. But a lot of Jung's psychological ideas come out of this encounter with the unconscious. Elijah and Salome are together. This is another quote from Jung. Because they are pairs of opposites. Elijah is an important figure in man's unconscious. He is the man with prestige, the man with a low threshold of consciousness, or with remarkable intuition. In higher society, he would be the wise man like Lao Tzu. He has the ability to get in touch with the archetypes. He will be surrounded with mana and will arise others because he touches the archetypes in others. He is fascinating and has a thrill about him. He is the wise man, the medicine man, the mana man. So this is this inner elder character. Elijah morphed at a certain point in Jung's visions and turned into this character who was named Philemon. Interestingly, a kind of human animal. He has the wings of a kingfisher here, standing on a golden dome. And Jung's conversations with Philemon, these inner conversations, gave birth to many of his psychological ideas. So that's Jung's journey with his unconscious. Notice how seriously he took this inner world. You have a different inner world from Jung. You're not going to meet the characters he met, but the characters you meet are every bit as important. And the reason for me showing these paintings is to just try to inspire you to take the inner world seriously. You know those daydreams when you think about something in the middle of the day and you dismiss it? Why not write it down? Why not draw a picture of it? If you have a dream at night, why not try to paint it? Take the inner world seriously and it will repay your efforts. Okay, that's enough from me. I'd like to hear any comments or questions you might have. And here's my coordinates on Facebook. By the way, if you're interested in dream psychology, feel free to join this Facebook group. I post on there, and there's my LinkedIn profile. Any comments or questions?
Yes, Glenn, thank you. You have given us much food for thought here. And we do have a couple of questions if you're happy to take a couple. Is that all right?
Yeah, feel free.
So just a couple of comments to start with. Diane said that a Cree friend of hers, who is an elder, has observed that for women, an elder must be postmenopausal and have grey hair or no colour in their hair, which is an interesting observation from the beginning. Now, Tom's got some thought-provoking comments and questions. He's got a good question here. So he says, traditional religions, indigenous or otherwise, note different sources of dreams, some sources being evil or deceptive or dangerous. Now, is that an issue or a problem? Because interpretation of symbols, for example, dreams, can depend on deeper hermeneutic frameworks, Jung's or Freud's or Erickson's or Buddhistic or Jewish or Christian. So it says as much or more about you than the symbol itself. So Glenn, you're favouring Jung, which some of us do in part, but why?
Good question. Very good question. That's a hermeneutical question where things get thorny. Interpretation. Jung, in a very simple and quick answer, Freud famously distinguished between latent content of the dream and manifest content. So he was always looking for what was hidden underneath the manifest content of the dream. Interestingly, many post-Freudians started looking more at the manifest content, which, including Erikson. So you get in the post-Freudians after Freud, a kind of switching back and forth between latent and manifest. Now, I think Jung was already doing that kind of switching. He was looking at the manifest and the latent. And so I see the place where the post-Freudians ended up, I think, is a very Jungian position. I like Jung because I think his theories are quite flexible and quite adaptable to various spiritual contexts. But I'm not uncritical of Jung. And, you know, when I look at indigenous traditions, especially, who have generally paid the most attention to dreams, I find many of them to be easily incorporated with Jungian ideas. And here I would follow Vine Deloria, who made that observation himself. Vine Deloria was instrumental in the American Indian movement in the 70s, the Red Power movement, post-colonial indigenous movements. And he really liked Jung because he thought Jung understood certain aspects of the indigenous worldview. But I would say don't get too hung up on hermeneutical schemas, because any dream you have is going to break out of that hermeneutical schema. Dreams, again, always show you something new. So as soon as you have a hermeneutical box for interpreting it, you'll get a dream that jumps outside the box, sometimes intentionally. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Very, very interesting. Earlier on, when we were talking about the twins in a dream, and you said that sometimes in later life, you know, which part of wisdom could be that we're more blunt.
Yes.
But where does bluntness in later life fit in with the tact that Erikson refers to?
Yes. Well, very good question. I'm still learning this with my kids, who are embarrassed by most things that come out of my mouth these days, preteen children. Tactfulness, yes. Well, I mean, in my tradition, Christianity, I always think of that verse that says, speaking the truth in love. We don't have sort of a blanket, we're not allowed simply to speak the truth without parameters, only when it is going to have a loving and caring effect on people. But I do love older people for their ability to call BS. Let's put it that way. They can be very blunt in terms of, you know, everyone else is dancing around the issue and they just name it. And as a therapist, I just love that.
Absolutely, yes. Georgina, who's with me in Australia, good morning, Georgina, backs it up by saying that in Australia, Indigenous elders teach Dreamtime stories to the young and develop the art form around that too. So, Glenn, thank you so much. Some of the things that I've taken from this today are that, you know, wisdom is the correct use of knowledge. That the purpose of dreams, you know, isn't actually judgment, but awareness and learning, and that most of the characters in your dreams are part of you. That's very thought-provoking. And in some ways, for me, that reacquaintance with deceased friends, families, and ancestors, and that they might have something to say to you. I've been fortunate that for me, that's been a very big comfort. So, yeah, terrific. Glenn, would you mind posting the Facebook group name into the chat for us, as people would like to know what that is? And
Sure.
And Alan has said Alan recommends the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation TV series North of North, which had some great wisdom and deep humour from the Inuit. So,
Yes.
yeah. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Jane.
Okay, thank you. I see Beate has her hand raised. I wonder if we can take just 1 minute to hear from Beate if you have a comment or
Oh,
quick
and I'm
question.
sorry, I realized I should have probably put this in the chat, but following what Sally's saying, I was particular, and thank you, Glenn, it's been fantastic talking about the reacquaintance with the deceased and friends and family. And I suppose in pastoral care, and I do a lot of bereavement counseling, those sort of stories, the dreams where they're reunited or their loved one comes back and tells them something or whatever, I find that really powerful to use in the work. And it makes me sort of always think of Robert Niemeyer's work, the continuum bonds theory in the grieving process, about that reconnecting. Can you, and it's probably over time, but is that sort of part of the bereavement work, part of the dream work? Can you even just guide us in that, or have a link to that or something like that would be really helpful?
I'm not sure if I have a link to that latter author you mentioned, but there is a lot of literature on dreams and death and dreams of the dying. Maybe Jane or Sally knows some links there, but I mean, let's just put it this way: dreams speak of an afterlife, and believing that the souls of your loved ones continue, I think, is immensely comforting for most people. And to me, in terms of grief work as a therapist, it makes a big difference between someone who believes in an afterlife and someone who doesn't. It's very different grief work. And my experience is that dreams are trying to convince people of some sort of hereafter. They do it within the person's tradition too, generally, and lineage, just like with the near-death literature.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, and thanks for that question, Beate.
Mhm.
And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We will wrap up at this point, and this has been possibly a deep and personal topic today for some of you. And so if it has touched on or triggered anything that has unsettled you, I just encourage you to seek out your sources of support. And thank you again, Glenn, especially for freely offering us your time and your work and your wisdom. When I send out the recording of today's webinar, I'll also send a link to a form where you can send us any feedback that you would like to communicate. Anyone who's participated in one or all of our webinars this past season, we would love to hear back from you as we plan for next year. Any ideas you have for speakers or topics that you'd love to hear more about, we're really looking forward to planning for the future. So this has been our final webinar for this season. It's time for a break. And so Sally has a blessing that she would like to send us forward with.
Thank you, Jane. So in the Northern Hemisphere, people are just starting to have a break from work. And so here is our blessing till our next Encore webinar series, which you'll all hear about. The old wise Sabbath says, stop now. As the sun touches the horizon, take the hand off the plough. Put down the phone. Let the pen rest on the paper. Turn off the computer. Leave the mop in the bucket and the car in the drive. The deep wisdom embedded in creation will take care of things for a while. Go well and be blessed all.